So now we are going to start the discussion section. And we thought you heard now a lot about, let's say, the needs, very specific from Marlene, and also the opportunities from Konstantinos. Please take your iPhones. And now let's take with a pulse check. And we will develop some kind of a word cloud reflecting the perspective of the room. So we take a minute, everybody can get it and type in your perspective. Das ist dieses hier. Das ist die Frage. Jetzt machen wir eine Word Cloud dazu. No, then a question should open up, and you can. What do you consider key pain points for SMEs regarding EU HTA? This question should pop up. Okay, and now type in your points. What do you, from your perspective, consider the key pain points? And that's a reflection of the room, then that's the bottom line. The first one said unpredictability. Fine. Give us all your gist. We are about 30 people in the room, 35, so 19 have done the poll, so we wait for the other 10. So we need to get the intelligence of the whole room. At least 25, 3 more to come. Yeah. Good. To start the discussion, as I said initially, in the end, the outcome of this one, and we need to discuss details and perhaps reflect to the room and the attendees, is to write a letter to the commissioner specifying the needs of the SME. Now, looking at this one, I see one minor topic is unpredictability. Let me ask Konstantinos, perhaps. Let me put you on the spot. What could a SME office do, both at EMA and at HTA, to address unpredictability? Difficult question.
No, it's a good question. If you look at the regulatory framework, the first slides on the different entry doors, and also all the development support structures that are available at EMA. I mean, all these tools have been developed and introduced with a view to increase predictability of submissions. So to make sure that the evidence generation is robust enough so that at time of actual dossier submission, the companies experience less hurdles at time of review. So there will be questions, there will be objections, there will be minor points that will need to be clarified, but the objective is that it increases predictability, which is very important for the industry. So, so I would say one of the important, I would say, tools to increase predictability is to have the support structures ahead of submission. So, and like it was highlighted, you need to plan this really well in advance. So, I mean, a figure of 2-3 years was highlighted, and this is quite important. So, I think the companies, or be it small or big, I mean, big pharma, they know. But for small companies, we need to increase a little bit the understanding and the knowledge that they have to plan the the engagement, the interaction with the authorities, be it regulatory or others, really well in advance. And so that means for them that they have to start putting together the development plan or HTA plans. I don't know if there's a specific term you use. Quite well in advance, and so I would say that's one side of one solution to look at it. Now, in relation to HTA, probably you are looking into into this at the moment. But if you look at by analogy, what's been done in the regulatory framework, this is what is in place, and it's been shown that it works. So if you look at a publication on, and I think Michael is at the back, there was a publication on an analysis on scientific advice at EMA level, and they looked at whether this was correlated to outcomes, how it was correlated to outcomes. They showed that the fact that they followed or they complied with the advice was correlated to more positive outcomes. So clearly there is a link. So, so on the predictability. Now, in terms of predictability, what I hear often from the discussion with industry organizations is the predictability in terms of timelines of reviews. So then, on the centralized procedure, this has been in place since the very beginning. So the timelines for review for centralized, it's set in legislation, 210 days. Then with some implementing rules on clock stops. So you have a time point during the review where companies or where the assessors or the reviewers identify what we call major objections to the approval. And these are sent to the companies, and they have a certain timeline to respond. Usually 3 months. Sometimes it's extended, depending on on the application. So that's quite important to have the timelines clearly set out so that the companies understand how they can plan the overall strategy for market access. So. So I would say that that's the second part I see as quite important in terms of clarity and having details on the actual procedural steps. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. There are 2 comments, but let me make, if I may, one comment feedback. We had the second big thing, the early dialogue. And that's where, and you mentioned it, Marcus and Marlene mentioned it, so a meaningful early dialogue. And I think the whole procedure is currently focused on JCA, and JSC is not as developed as we know, and that's a big issue. So I think Leslie has a point, then Renato, then Stefano. First, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you, Jörg, and I apologize. I don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom. So, yeah. So, in terms of predictability, I understand from the previous presentation that it's more about the predictability regarding the PICOs that will be asked at the end in the assessment scope. The predictability in terms of timelines. So, I mean, we are here in a totally different situation as for EMA, where the data package can be discussed in advance, where it is mature enough for a submission of marketing authorization application at EMA. Here we have an automatic process, if you wish, in the sense that once the developer apply at EMA, it's an obligation to apply for JCA as well. And if we don't receive the SMPC and the clinical review, in any case, we will get it from EMA because EMA has to inform us about this, the validation of the marketing authorization application. This is in the regulation. So I would say that in terms of starting or when to submit, it's very clear. It's when you submit for a marketing authorization application at EMA. Then in terms of timelines, so there are some times that are already, or days, deadlines that are fixed in the regulation. And in addition to that, there is the procedural guidance that have been developed by the JCA subgroup and adopted by the coordination group with a Gantt chart when you can see the different, times of the different phases of the assessment. So I would recommend to have a look at it. And when we send the letter to the HTD informing them about the start of the JCA, we also mention when the assessment scope is planned to be finalized by the JCA subgroup. And so from there, when we expect to have the deadline for the submission of the dossier as well. And then it's reiterated when we send the commission first request. But in terms of timeline, we are also dependent on the timelines of the centralized procedure, because the JCA report shall be finalized at the latest at the day of when the Commission grants the marketing authorization, which means 67 days after the CHMP opinion. So when there are some, clock stops, either reduced clock stops or, increased stops, extension of stock stops in the centralized procedure, that may also affect the timelines of the JCA because both procedures are done in parallel. As for the methodological points regarding the PICOs, that I think this is something that could be discussed with the coordination group and JCA subgroup, but like explained before, this is not in the remit of the Commission to develop methodological guidance. So I hope this is helpful.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Now, Renato, Stefano, Matthias, Maureen. Renato.
Thank you. Very shortly. Congratulations on all the speakers for their presentations, which I appreciated. I learned a lot. But assume that the story of timing for SME is okay. Assume that is okay, that they need and they deserve more support because they are weaker than big in economical terms and as structurally than biggest. However, the cahier de doléances that I heard from the small company, B1, should not be there because as a matter of fact, they have to support everybody, big, small, medium, they like Coca-Cola, they have to support the same benefit, efficacious treatments. So that said, I think that a grammatical proposal could be that the table between HTD and assessor should release, for example, a template where they illustrate all the PICOs that need mandatorily to be present in their work. And this independent of the time needed, that is a discussion within the bureaucratical setting. I think that this way could help a lot SMEs to assess their work in order to bring about the final outcome for the presentation of the dossier.
Thanks very much. Stefano?
Just a comment about the key pain points. Unpredictability, early dialogue, which is a difference about these key points between a small, medium, and a big pharma. There is no difference. the problem of predictability of PICOs is a problem for any dimension of a company. So I don't understand why, I disagree with the majority probably, these are specifically key pain points for SMEs. In my opinion, there is no this difference, but maybe somebody may give an answer.
Yeah, maybe to comment on this. I mean, you're absolutely right. A PICO scheme is a PICO scheme, and a product is a product, and an indication is an indication. You can argue. I totally get this point. But the implications of dealing with many PICO schemes and dealing with the unpredictability, foreseeing certain scenarios, as we call it in industry, PICO simulation exercises is a resource issue at the end of the day. So yeah, it's an issue. Like, I mean, this is also the reason of existence, I would say, of the SME office at EMA, that there is a lack of resources and it's harder to predict in a way. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the job can be done if you have enough resources, probably. But even the bigger companies have sometimes difficulties. So what we are talking here about is not just, it's not only the SME perspective, also bigger companies might have challenges in predicting this, but the issue is bigger for the small companies due to the lack of resources.
Can I add something? Just like there are different ways to simulate your PICOs. So you can ask an external vendor to look through HTA guidelines and, you know, prior decisions and clinical guidelines, or you can ask your affiliates. So a lot of our, what I understand, and Maria, you can maybe comment on this as well, but at least some of the bigger companies I've spoken to, they simply ask their affiliates. As a small and medium-sized company, you just don't have affiliates. You don't have affiliates in all the markets, so you cannot ask. So I do think there are, I mean, of course it's the same problem, but it's still a little bit of a different magnitude whether you're a small company or a larger company, because a larger company just has more presence and they can ask more people more easily than a smaller company can.
Yeah, this is economics, right? The answer is this is economics.
Yeah, it's economics, but it's also like gives you
I understand the problem.
Maureen, then Matthias. Maureen, you have.
Yeah, a bit more fundamental question behind having to submit information on PICOs for which you don't add additional data from your clinical studies. That also creates a sort of an incentive to do the literature study less good, because you might be summarizing evidence in favor of your competitors. Because you don't have additional data yourself. So if you do that job very well, and depending on the results, of course, you might help your competitor. So inherently, there is an incentive to do these literature reviews less good, maybe. Has that been discussed? Or can you ask of pharmaceutical companies to submit data that help the competitors, looking at maybe at markets? Has that been an issue? Has that been this?
Quality of literature review is the question. I don't know.
No, the issue is not, it is the incentive to maybe, if you help your competitor, to do it less good for the PICOs for which you don't have the additional data. I know from one of the case studies that they had 13 PICOs and they only had data for 7. So at first they submitted the 7 and then they got the dossier back saying it was incomplete, you have to do the other 6 as well. And it was a small company. They didn't have the resources to do it, and maybe also not the incentive to do it 100% as good as they needed to do, depending on the outcome. You might not agree, but that issue is certainly something that is there.
So Sylvie, perhaps, and then Mira.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to respond. I'm not sure I agree on that comment. I don't think it's about the quality of the review, because the protocol is the protocol, there's guidance on that. I think it's how far you go to address the gap. For example, if you can't find relevant studies in the reviews, then would you go to real world, would you try and get access to a registry, real world data to do external control arm comparisons? So I think it's more about like, how, you know, when do you say, okay, we don't have data? Where do you draw the line? I think that's really unclear.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, but still, having done reviews myself multiple times, there's always debate about little things in the indication definition, whether or not to include a paper, yes or no, so you can influence the quality of that as well.
Perhaps Mira, and then we have Leslie and then Matthias.
Yes, it's with regards to the comment on the no difference between SMEs and big pharma on PICOs. This may be true, but there is a difference, a huge difference with regards to disease area. And in this situation, which are we facing now, meaning oncology, ATNPs, gene therapy, cell therapy, etc., if these indications are developed by SMEs, there is a problem. There is also a problem for big companies because we are dealing with methodology, general methodology, HTA guidelines that are not adapted to these situations.
Matthias. And then Leslie.
Thank you very much. Matthias Olsen with UCOPE. So, Konstantinas, I really appreciated your presentation. So, I'm not a regulatory expert, so this was really insightful. And I liked how we, even when we set up EMA, this was a realization a bit later on. It seems like that we needed additional support for the small to mid-sized companies, and it's clear that we need that support, because if not, those rules would not be there. If not, the office would not exist. That the smaller companies need some additional support to go through the same procedures, and I think it's absolutely necessary that we increase the advice opportunities for everyone, especially for small to mid-sized companies. Those advice meetings are needed. But that's probably not sufficient, because what you said struck me. I mean, you said that the smaller companies really appreciate those informal interactions, so those SME briefing meetings, SME briefings. And it struck me because I was speaking to a smaller company the other day and talking about joint scientific consultations. They were saying, oh, should we go for it, should we not go for it? I mean, how would this impact our JCA? And of course, when all the interactions in the procedure are formal and might have a very direct impact on your product, then that's seen as more risky, and there might be very difficult to get agreement within the company to go for that. And if those are the only interactions that are there, then there is no interactions at all that are happening with companies. So for smaller companies that has fewer assets, where all of your profitability is tied up into those few assets, that's of course a larger risk, speaking in economic terms. So maybe we should think about, yes, increasing those advice opportunities, but also taking learnings from what EMA has been doing and setting up more informal interactions as well. So a pre-submission meeting, for example, is currently not happening under the HTA regulation, but that could be very helpful for everyone to understand, have a clear understanding of the timelines, which you mentioned, Leslie, but also of what is needed, what has changed since you received a joint scientific consultation. This is what we are planning to submit. That information could be helpful also for the assessors, but those informal interactions, maybe that's what's needed.
Thanks, Leslie. You had a comment or comments?
Yes, and thank you, Matthias, for your intervention. Yes, just about what I heard about the PICOs, just to clarify, but I'm pretty sure this is clear for everybody already, the fact that the PICOs are policy needs driven and not data driven. That explains that some PICOs might not be addressable in a sense. So when the HTD received the assessment scope with, for example, 13 PICOs, what needs to be provided in the dossier is a strong justification that the PICO, if one PICO is not addressed or several PICOs are not addressed, what is needed in the dossier is a strong justification for not having addressed the PICOs. So based on what is the systematic literature review that was done, what was the selection criteria, what were how you selected the studies, were there enough data there to build a network meta-analysis to derive treatment effect estimates, etc. All of these should be justified. And this is why during the confirmation check, you may receive also some additional requests for justification or for some PICOs or for systematic literature review, because it's not acceptable if a PICO, if there is no systematic literature review for one PICO, for example, and just saying that the PICO was not addressed, and there is no justification in this case. So just to clarify, but it's not expected that if there is no data, no possibility to address the PICO and it is justified, it's not a way to, reject the dossier in a way, so.
Thanks, Leslie. Next one is Fabrizio, James, and Monter. Fabrizio.
10 seconds. Is JCA a competitive tool between companies? I think so. This is the reason why the medium enterprise can be penalized because of the resources, because of the knowledge, know-how, and so on. Which are the consequences of this penalization? Because many new innovative products are coming from medium enterprise, I guess one consequence for the community is to reduce the innovation. The other consequence is products from small companies, and small companies will be more palatable for big companies. So it is a consequence concentrating, making weaker the small medium enterprises to be bought by big companies. That's all.
Exactly, don't launch in Europe. That's one of the options. James.
Thank you. I've been sort of following the discussion. I've got a couple of reflections. One, Leslie just talked around the PICOs being policy-driven at a national level. That's not actually in the regulations. That's been an interpretation. Mm-hmm. And one would hope at a policy level that is informed by some form of scientific thinking around why are we choosing these comparators and why are we choosing these sort of populations. But I want to come back to where's the difference with an SME compared to maybe a larger company? And having come from a larger company, I've sat here and reflected on that. So I think the first, there are several things. It's not just economics. Some may just not be based in Europe. So they may not even be aware of JCA to start with. And we've seen 2 or 3 of the JCAs now are non-European based new companies with that. Linked to that as well is even if they're based in Europe, they're unlikely to have people in each of the countries. So they don't understand the complexity or the diversity of the system in those companies. So there's a lack of knowledge from that perspective. Some may never have launched before, so this is not only new from a regulatory perspective, it's completely new to them from a HTA perspective. Again, comes down to that sort of corporate knowledge that they've got in there. For many, it may be the first time in that particular disease area. I'm AstraZeneca. We've launched many times in lung cancer and breast cancer. We're familiar with it, but that might not be the case with somebody who's working in a much smaller company with that. And then I think the final bit, it is a bit about economics and so forth, but they're generally smaller companies. Some of these are small biotechs with just a handful of people, so they need to prioritize where the resourcing is going. And JCA is not saving us resourcing. It's actually increasing the investment we need to do at this stage. So they're all part of the reasons why it is there's some unique characteristics around that. We share common issues around PICOs and the size and so forth, but it probably affects people in slightly different ways as a result.
Just echoing on what you're saying, first on the political PICO selection. Just allow me a comment. I've never heard from EMA that a comparator selection is political. It's a bit provocative, but I want to spell that out very clearly. I'm worried about political PICO scheme selection, and I've never heard from GBA that a comparator selection is political. A comparator selection should be scientific, should reflect the standard of care. I think we have to be very careful in our wording there. And actually, I hope we all agree on that. We understand that all the member state needs to be reflected. We understand that in industry. We don't want to go against that. but it's a level of how high we put that objective. If that's the overall objective, and to exaggerate a little bit, if that's the only objective, I have my doubts that we are moving in the right direction. Comparator selection needs to be, in my understanding, scientific first and foremost. The other point I wanted to mention is really on the perspective of smaller companies, and it's an issue of resources, and let's face it, and it's an issue of, can companies in a very short period of time, because there is barely, and there's no opportunity to extend those deadlines. You can, under certain circumstances for dossier preparation, you can extend 100 days, but it's not always clear. Certainly if there's a regulatory clock stop, you can argue. But other than that, there's few guidance on that. I mean, I'm just pointing my finger where some issues are. There are many good guidance documents, and we appreciate very much all the horizontal guidance documents, the Q&As and so on. I don't want to criticize only, but we're just putting our finger like where the issue is from the SME perspective, and it's really important that we make sure that there is an understanding about these issues. But I don't know, Leslie, if you want to respond. I see you. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, exactly. So maybe to clarify, of course, it's like it is in the regulation. So the PICOs are there to address all member states' needs in regard to their healthcare system. So in particular, like, for example, the comparators that are using in their own country. So this is what was meant by that, by policy-driven. And of course, they are developed in the sense that they are developed only based on scientific issues. So it's not a political thing. So
perhaps we can
just
consider this
clarify.
one for the 2028 revision to clarify that we should, how should I say, follow evidence-based medicine on the PICOs. But now we have Monter, we have...
It does, it's quite clear. So it's following evidence-based medicine, of course, it's everywhere in the guidance as well. So I think it's very
We have
clear.
Mira, we have Monter, and we have Sylvie. I don't know. So we start with Monter, and then Mira, and then Sylvie. Okay, Monter, please.
Before making my point, I would like to argue on PICO policy-driven. It is reasonable that HTA is supposed to support policy decision, and therefore PICO is supposed to be policy-driven. What is shocking is that the policy question is kept hidden, and the rationale for the policy question is kept hidden. So that's the big issue, not why it's policy-driven. And there is no intention to provide any clarity on that question. Okay, that's my point on the policy-driven. The topic I would like to address is the number of PICO. I see very often 13, 14, 15, but in fact it's not true, because we don't consider the subgroup. When you look at the subgroup, you have to do an SLR, because you have standalone publication for a subgroup that exists. So if you don't do a systematic literature review, you miss the standalone publication, because it's not enough to look at the main publication and the subgroup presented in the main publication. Then you have to do the extraction, then you have to do the analysis, then you have to do the reporting. It's exactly like a single PICO. And I have seen, and I was shocked, up to 300 PICO if you calculate the subgroup. 300 PICO. And I understand the Commission saying, we have very transparent timelines. Yes, but it's not because they are transparent that they are feasible, and somebody should think whether they are feasible or not. And the Commission wash its hands and say, because it's not my problem, look with the coordination group. Okay, we have to turn to 20 people, different organizations and bodies to be able to raise a question every time you have to discuss. That's not reasonable. It is the responsibility of the Commission that the regulation is followed, and we have infringement to the regulation on how it is applied at several places. I can quote, for example, that in the regulation, it specifies that ATMP should have a specific methodology which is adapted to ATMP. But in practice, this doesn't exist. It's supposed to be a clarification meeting about the PICO, but the meeting exists in theory. In practice, it does not exist. And the Commission washed its hands. Look with the coordination group. I think it's not fair.
Thanks, Monte. Mira.
Yes, thank you. This is the question for Leslie. Hello, Leslie. Is she here? Hello, je suis très contente de te voir, Leslie. Okay, so...
Merci, Mira.
Voilà. So I have one question, which is to which extent the PICO choice is context-driven? In the regulation, it's written that each country reflects their needs. In which extent the PICO choice considers the mode of action of a new drug, the aim of treatment of a new drug with regards to what exists, the subpopulation, the line of treatment, etc. For me, it's still not sufficiently clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mira, and that I'm afraid, and it's also linked to the previous intervention, that this question is really for the JCA subgroup. So like I explained, you know, the Commission, we are in charge of the procedural rules. As regard the timelines, you know, this is part of the implementing regulation that has been adopted by member states. So now Commission is implementing those implementing regulation and the HTA regulation. For the discussion on the PICOs, I would only refer to the JCA subgroup and the coordination group and the methodological subgroup as well. So.
If there is corruption, it's the problem of the coordination. It's not your problem. It's outside of
Sylvie.
Thank you. This is a question for Leslie as well. So it's on the addressability of PICOs. You said, you know, if a PICO is not addressable, then you justify in your dossier why it's not addressable. But for me, I think that, again, I was making the point earlier that that is not very clear from the guidance document of when is a PICO not addressable. Is that when there's nothing in the SLR? Do you then have to go to real-world registries to try and find data on that relevant comparator or population? Or in situations where there is data available, but it's in very small patient numbers, and after you do the matching, you end up with 20 effective sample size, which is a very small patient population to compare to, and gives you highly, highly uncertain results, making the comparison very uncredible. So is that also, you know, do you then also argue that it's not addressable? And so I think this point is really not very clear from the guidance document. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
No, thank you for your question. I think that, and it was already said, I think by the chair of the MPG subgroup, that, you know, the guidance documents are all, you know, reflections you may have, and if the guidance document currently does not address your needs, this is something that you could, you know, send all your, the questions and aspects that you would like to be better covered in the guidance so that, you know, the guidance can be updated. But, and then for this, you know, like the sources of information, you know, that they are listed in the template, the dossier template, so Annex 1 of the implementing regulation.
Good, and last question, and then I think we are also at the end of the time. Please.
Thank you, Jörg. So I represent a medium to larger sized company, and like B1, we've had our challenges of predicting PICO. I think the difference between what you face and we face is that our internal teams have heard of HTA, so we don't have to teach them that, but they've never heard of JCA, so you still have that part to cover. I'll give you a recent example. We've done an internal PICO simulation from the European markets with a policy-based question. We have 70 PICOs. Now multiply that by what was said about subgroups, and each of these PICOs is a significant amount of analysis. Now we don't think that we're gonna have 70 in the end, it will be less, but we don't know what the number is, which ones are not going to be in the final scope. So, and even if it is 15, I ask, are we really going to use all of this data analysis to make informed decisions. And how much of this is data drenching that will never be used? So what I think we urgently need for all companies is the ability to have dialogue and ask questions about what are the PICOs that you truly want. Because we want to prepare them, we want to do good quality submissions. But right now we don't have a chance to have any type of interaction before submission. And even once the process starts, Leslie mentioned questions. What we've heard from company experiences is that during the scoping meetings, none of the questions are being answered. So there is no opportunity right now to have any dialogue before you submit. And the danger in this is that we're just pushing this problem to once the submissions happen, when we have much, much shorter times to respond to them.
Excellent. Thanks for this comment and thanks for the discussion. Those who know me know that I made this example previously, but I need to repeat this one. You know Henry Kissinger, and you know his famous quote, "What is Europe's phone number?" That he asked a while ago when he was Secretary of State. And now we all know we are in an increasingly competitive global environment with most favored nation, with declining European market share, and so on and so on. So we urgently need to think about what is our European position in this global environment. And my point is, what is Europe's PICO? So I'm very, very passionate about this one, because I think the society needs to request from the companies good data, ideally an RCT, but whatever data can be developed, but for one PICO. And all the other things, so if we come up with a multiplicity of PICOs, this is further weakening the European position. That's my personal view. But thanks for great discussion. Thanks, Leslie, for joining this one. Thanks for the Commission to be here, and to all the presenters. Thanks, Konstantinos and all, Marlene, the other presenters, for great discussion. I don't know if you have any final word?
No, likewise, many thanks for this discussion, which has shown various different perspectives, which is always great, and it's also good that we have clear and a little bit dense discussions here and there. I think this is what this group is all about, and this is what I really like about it. I think we've made a bit our case why there is a capacity issue, not just on the assessor side, but also on the company side here and there. We've made our point very clear how we think about PICO schemes being more on the scientific part, and Leslie, we hear you very clearly that of course we do know that there is also science in the PICO selection exercise. That is not what we're saying, but the word political PICO selection raises some concerns on our end in industry. This is not just an SME issue. We hope that we can continue that discussion also from the mid-sized company perspective. We will probably reach out and discuss with the one or the other colleague in this room the points which we discussed, which we might then share with the Commission, where we see a gap for smaller companies in terms of capacity issue. But let me also say at the end, it's clear the ultimate objective also from our end is very much to have robust dossiers living up to the highest standards, and of course trying to bring an RCT to the table. But it's not possible with so many different comparators to have RCTs for all of them. I think that is also clear. Thanks very much, Jörg, for inviting us and kicking this discussion off, and it is to be continued. Thanks.